So it would seem. Well, I'd like to welcome everybody as we kick off this semester's Berlage sessions. So I'd like to welcome, we have both a set of Berlage students, so all of our Berlage students at the postmaster level, as well as we offered this also as a course as a special MSc elective to students completing their Master of Architecture degree also. And we're also broadcasting live via YouTube. Well, first of all, Patrice, I'd like to thank you for being such a good sport to wake up at the ungodly hour of 6:45 in the morning, New York time to give this lecture, but we thank you very much since you are kicking off the series that we at least maintain some consistency. Again, it's very unfortunate that we weren't able to finally meet in person after so many emails and conversations, but we're very glad to still have you present here in this virtual way. Maybe to explain a little bit about the sessions. So today we will begin with Patrice Derrington's lecture entitled Calculation and Speculation. So the Berlage sessions are a 7-part thematic seminar series that we run each semester. And this is a kind of the second component of our 2-part public program. So the idea here is that we choose a theme that focuses on scholarly research and critical approaches to issues relating to contemporary architecture and urban design. And we ask speakers like Patrice to link architectural thinking and practice to not only the history of ideas, but also to changing social cultural conditions. This semester's series is entitled Architectures of Speculation, and it considers architecture's historical and contemporary relationship to real estate speculation, from urban developments associated with late 19th century London and Paris and post-war Rome, to issues of land ownership, the spatial ordering of property, and buildings as financial instruments. We asked Patrice to come and kick off the series by giving a big picture lecture, basically given her experience on the history and contemporary practice of real estate speculation, and to think, her work essentially thinks in very progressive ways of how to deal with this reality. So working within and against the mechanisms that define contemporary real estate speculation. Patrice Derrington is the Mark Holliday Professor and Director of the Real Estate Development Program at Columbia University. She holds a PhD from UC Berkeley, an MBA from Harvard, and a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Queensland. In her industry experience on Wall Street, Patrice worked as an investment banker and advisor and a fund manager to major individual and institutional clients such as David Rockefeller, Key Bank, and the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation. She is also a registered architect and has led urban development projects throughout the US and Australia. It is a pleasure very much, Patrice, to have you kick off today's series, and we very much look forward to the lecture and having had a sneak peek at the PowerPoint, which I usually don't do this morning. I'm very excited by the content of the talk, so we're looking forward to it. So thank you so much. And again, thanks again for being a good sport and doing this so early in the morning. We appreciate it very much. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much. My delight to be here, and best wishes for a fabulous new year. I know we're doing a new academic year. I know we're doing it in challenging times, but hopefully it'll be exciting and we'll explore new things in our profession. So let me pull up my slides and we'll get started. Yep. There we go. As Solomon said, the important thing for architects to understand is how intricately architecture, design, and so on is involved in real estate development, intertwined in real estate development, and therefore providing you with this discussion of development and how it comes to be helps you integrate architecture, confront architecture with these activities. Just let me get rid of Pink Floyd. My apologies. Here we go. The first thing about real estate is obviously that it sits on land. Land is the basis for which real estate will actually resolve and come to be. And upon it will rise real estate, buildings, mankind, man's ability to move and to have their being. In all its varieties, real estate is about the ownership of land. And the ownership of land is not just about possession, but it is about the use. How is the use of real estate undertaken? How does private property come to exist? Does it require consent? How is it consistent with the living of a good life? How does real estate impact our human existence? Once we have real estate, we're concerned with what are the proper limits. The philosophy of real estate goes back a long way. For us in the European tradition, we probably look back to Plato, Aristotle, Pythagoras, and listen to what they say about the ownership and distribution of property and how it relates to man and his existence. Plato was important in that he was said to favor common ownership. However, the golden class as overseers were the target of his concern. As a way of presenting them from using their privileged position, their second best city was to be not held in common, but actually to have ownership, individual ownership of real estate. So Plato saw ownership of property as being a way of actually creating an existence and being part of a community. Everyone was to labor on the land. Everyone was to look for the benefits of land. It was not until later that we decided that we would have criticisms of this. Aristotle, on the other hand, was counter to common ownership. What Aristotle said was, what is common to the greatest gets the least amount of care. If anyone is familiar with the large area of economics known as the curse of the commons, they know that this is a problem with real estate and property. That if a common folks are using it, then it will be not tended, it will be overused, and if there is no individual ownership. So between Plato saying that common sharing could be a good thing or should be a good thing, except for, except for pushing it too far, and Aristotle saying that private property and ownership are important for the individual person, what we have is three actual basic fundamental tenets of how we could view the ownership of private property from a real estate perspective. I'm sorry, I seem to have some interruption, sorry. So the three are that the sustenance, pleasure, and positive self-esteem are derived from private ownership, because to think of a thing as your own makes an expressible difference. Aristotle believed that owning something and thinking of it as your own is important. This is going to be different to the actual ownership. And this is an important understanding for real estate and how it comes to be developed and used more extensively in common and yet have individual ownership. Private property is also a necessity for the exercise of generosity. Starting with private property, you were able to have the resources to give and to provide for others. I'm just going to pause for a second. I'm sorry, we seem to have, do you mind if I just try and resolve this sound problem with the animations here? Sorry, we seem to have some background that continues to come. Let me just, here we go. No sound. My apologies, folks. It is early in the morning. Show media controls. All right, let's try this again. Okay, there we go. My apologies. Oh, it's coming back. Never mind. Private property, a third aspect is that it is importantly utilitarian. The socially responsible concept of real estate pertains not just to owning it, not just to whether you share it or not, or share access to it, but actually that you share use to it. You share the ability to use real property. We have an important understanding of property and its relation to politics and to social culture, coming from Somers. He says it was not property that caused political rights, but it was the political culture of membership that produced property. So what is very important about understanding real estate is that real estate did not arise, ownership of property did not arise and become something overlaid onto human society, but rather the human society has created real estate as a tool, as a mechanism by which it manages its community and its social effect. Real estate and real property and land, in fact, was right at the heart of this, because from the very beginning, the competition for land, for its use, for your ability to live off it, was a competition. Use of it by one person meant that other people were restricted from it, and it had, therefore, a zero-sum game implication. Therefore, what's important is that we...
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yes.
We don't see the slides. Shall I otherwise maybe share the slides via my computer?
Would you mind? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Hold on. Sorry.
It's fine.
Do you have that background sound?
No, I can turn it off, and then you can
thank you.
ask me for next slide whenever you are.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that. We're all getting to be a little bit more proficient with Zoom. Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful. All right, so we get down to value. Okay, now next. Thank you. Okay, so therefore, what is the value of land? We've understood that one, maybe it should be held in common. Two, other people thought that individual ownership is best. However, philosophers agreed that whatever happens, it should be utilized and utilized for the common good. Its utilization, however, will be competitive. So this, in fact, establishes for mankind a certain value. It means that we are going to now determine how important land is to us in terms of our needs for our existence and all of the other aspects of human living. Next slide. Okay, so use easy agrarian communities. That's how we started for millennia. We use land to grow and grow food, to live on, to hunt animals and to exist. Next slide. Very importantly, as was referred to by philosophers, it became a tool of power. It was created by the community to organize the community, and therefore certain people were able to take control of it for governance. Next slide. Additionally, the ownership of land, because of the need of it for existence, and then for the ability to use it for power, it became a symbol of social status, a symbol of ability to survive, a symbol of ability to rule and dominate. Next slide. The question is, how does one come by it? For many years, obviously, for millennia, it was battles. No one transacted land, or maybe a few people did very diplomatically, but mostly it was battles. Lives, wars, battle expenditure, and so on. Quite an expensive way to gain more land. Next slide. So this went on for a long time until, and throughout, the world and so on. We're just going to focus with little old England and what happened there. William the Conqueror came from, obviously from the continent, bringing with him, next slide, bringing with him the Anglo-Saxon, bringing with him the Norman culture to Anglo-Saxon Britain. The Norman culture, as you know, had developed around the feudal system. So this is, next, this is the system that William the Conqueror basically put in place on top of the Anglo-Saxon Britain communities, which were fundamentally much more communal and local. He established, for the first time for England, something of a kingdom. He reigned. Under him, he put loyal nobles. Nobles had various people, working for them and helping them. And then the peasants were ruled by this group. Next. The important thing about William's decisions regarding England's land was that he removed the notion of 4,000 indigenous leaders and their small communities and replaced it, basically did a consolidation, replaced it with a manageable number of lords, 200 lords, that could be loyal to him. He used land, next. He used land to give him loyalty, taxes, and military resources. He designated land to these nobles. In the end, he retained ownership, ultimate control, but he used it as a bargaining chip to control these nobles. Next. Okay, so the issue was that typically land, one lord wanted a little more land, the other lord was a little weak, so one lord went in with, in battle and took some more. William the Conqueror did not want this. He established a situation where he said, I am going to define everyone's ownership or everyone's responsibility for land, title to land under my rule, and we're not going to have any fights about it. We're not going to waste time fighting internally. So next. So he established, had a survey done, and he defined, next slide, next. He defined all of these estates officially. He recorded them and said that this was going to remain as is. Don't bother going into battle. Importantly, he did not just define the land in terms of geography. He defined the land in terms of what was called hides. Hides were related to the amount of taxes that were to be provided from that ownership of land. Taxes, of course, at that time weren't coinage, they were in the form of produce. Specifically, your land now came with an overlay of an economic contribution to the king. Next. So now we have commerce, or in fact, the transaction of produce mapped onto land. Next one. It was required for production to a given economic level. The taxes were required. The taxes were set by the king, and that tax had to be met by working the land. Next. Next. Okay, so the way in which it worked was that the noble had land, had to put on the land tenant farmers. The tenant farmers worked the land in terms of either growing food or cattle or produce of various types, and paid an excess of that to the lord as their rent. They were tenant farmers. They paid rent in the form of in-kind agricultural production. The lord then passed on that produce, that surplus, as taxes to the king. So we now have a hierarchy and a purely economic dynamic related to the land, and most importantly, its ability to produce. Next. The way in which the lord or the noble interacted with the tenant farmer was in terms of a lease, and with the lease came the notion of rent. As I said, it was produce. Next, Luton, thanks. Its value to the farmer was to take the subsistence of the total produce, and from that, the farmer would have to produce the rent. Next. The value to the title holder was that the rent came to the lord, however, the lord was not able to use it for agricultural farming. Therefore, the net was, for the lord, equivalent to the tax that they were able to pay. So the important thing here is that by the production on the land by the farmer and the economic relationship with the lord, and that lord's economic obligation to the king, now the land had a value of to the farmer and to the lord in basically economic terms. Next. Next. No, sorry, back. Thank you. When coinage came into effect, this rent changed from being a bushel of wheat, and you can see here the way in which taxes were often brought to be paid, Here we now changed into the notion of coinage. Pounds weren't actually used at that time, but we'll use it, you know, as an example of the coinage that was used at the time. The notion was going to be that a coinage determination or a financial determination in terms of coinage for the relationship between the land and the actual taxes paid was through the economic transaction between the landlord and the tenant and the payment of what was called rent. Rent now being, instead of, as I say, produce, it's £1. If the tenant has the right to use the land for 20 years and produce that £1 in rent every year, then the value of that financial arrangement, that economic understanding and the equivalency on both sides of the landholder and landowner and the tenant is £20. Okay, so this was a very specific way of adding a financial determination to this economic arrangement. Once again, remembering that it's about what the land produced. Next. Okay, next, just do a couple here, Ludo. Thanks. Thank you, great. All right, so what we had was, of course, weighing in this while commerce is coming in and, you know, we're starting to get a bit of an economic view of relationships between peoples regarding land use. The religion was weighing in. We had the classical philosophers talking about you could own it, but it's got to do community good. However, Christianity also produced an important perspective by Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas actually condoned the use of land, said it was, you know, you had to own it, but you had to use it to live. If you owned it, you were to be responsible for maintaining it and the productivity of it, right? You owned it at God's will. God said you had to be responsible and make it productive. Furthermore, we started to have some constraints on ownership and its productivity. And that was, you could own it, but you needed to avoid greed. So you weren't going to tax too much. You weren't going to, you know, overproduce and so on. So we had, on one hand, the St. Thomas Aquinas' philosophy, and the other hand, we had St. Francis Assisi coming on and saying, well, actually, you probably shouldn't own anything. What I'm trying to say is, what I'm trying to show here is that, you know, land continued to be, ownership and the use of land and the responsibility of land continues to be and continues to be something of a moral conflict for humans. And that continues to today. I've talked about how it started with the classical philosophers. Now we've come through with sort of the religion of Christianity in the Middle Ages. And this is having an impact on how land is being used and governed. Next. We do have the arrival of capitalism. Next. Give me a couple, thank you, great. All right, in the late Middle Ages, of course, capitalism came in. It was, the notion about capitalism was an additional dimension now on this productivity. And this productivity was not just to produce what was needed, that is, a farmer produced enough to subsist and also to pay the rent to the Lord produced enough to subsist and pay the taxes to the king. But now there was a desire to actually produce even more. What if we had a little bit more? What could we do with that? And what sort of pleasure and reward does that bring us? Initially, it was in terms of extra produce. However, what farmers would do would take produce to markets and swap it and exchange it for other things that they could use. So, you know, the surplus was put to use even before coinage came. Once you had coinage, of course, now it became represented, that surplus became represented in financial terms. Next. This came to England. England had been very rural, very agrarian. From the Italian banking houses, the Italian merchants who had a roaring trade. And of course, we had the Renaissance emerging from that. And next one. And of course, our Netherlands. Very rich trading center. And this well-known painting, of course, is about the wealthy merchants in the lowlands at the time and their ability to exert power because of their ownership of land and their wealth. Next. All right, over to England again. Now we have, give me a couple, please, Ludo. Thanks. Okay, we have in England, we're getting towards the end of the late Middle Ages. England's a little slow to get started on the Renaissance, but eventually Henry VIII has an exchequer named Thomas Cromwell. Henry needed more revenues because he was fighting these constant battles with the French and then the Spanish and then, you know, back and forth defending lowlands, and he needed money. Thomas Cromwell was a commoner, but very smart, and came in with the idea of raising significant revenues for Henry through a better management of the land. He looked at the feudal system, or the system that had its variation under the Norman rule, and that was that many of the aristocrats were probably paying lower taxes than they could, and so he looked at that and started raising their taxes. But importantly, because of the other concerns with Henry and the Catholic Church and his marriages, Cromwell looked at the church land. By this time, the Roman Church had 20% of England's land, between its abbeys, monasteries, churches, and so on. The annual income of this land was about 150,000, that should be pounds, and that was a lot of money in today's terms, of course, but all of this went straight to Rome. No taxes to Henry, nothing into his treasury, and so on. So what happened was they started the dissolution of the monasteries. Many people have opinions on the dissolution of the monasteries, down to the horror of the desecration of all of the beautiful statuary and so on. But an important thing for Cromwell was that he was able to take this land over about 10 years, took a huge amount of land back, and either put new leases on to be more productive, or actually sold it off to wealthy merchants who were arising at the time in England. He raised 1.4 million pounds once again, and of course, you know, that's an enormous amount of money today. Importantly, how he established this valuation, how he decided what he was going to sell the land for, was that he referred back to that old transaction between tenant and landlord, and that was, what was the annual rent by the number of years of the lease. He formalized that as being the determination of the value of the land. Next. Give me a little bit more. I've got a picture there, I think. Good, thank you. Okay, so now we have a formalization at the highest level of what the value of land is. The land is the amount of rent that can be derived from it. If you remember, the amount of rent that can be derived from it is the result of what can be produced on it. And then there was the attempt, of course, now with capitalism and Elizabethan trade, for human activity to strive to produce more in terms of a surplus, to actually attain the highest possible output from human activities and therefore from land. So what happened was that we came to the point of maximizing agrarian production, and this is when it changed from being producing, for example, a lot of wheat or agricultural produce, to actually being pastures for sheep, because sheep produced wool, and Europe was pretty keen on England's wool at the time. So even land was converted from agriculture to pastoral, and agrarian production was maximized. What this started to mean, of course, for urban land, for the land that was arising in the urban centers of England as the merchant activity started, was that it looked to be more dense. And particularly we had London starting to double its population over the subsequent 20 years. Now we actually have, once again, a question about the price of land. Now we're going to have it more dense, more used, more pressured. Therefore, what is its value? Does its value have a potential beyond what it is actually producing in rent today or in produce today? And with that potential, for whom, for what, and why? Next. Next, sorry. Next, give me a couple, good, thank you. Okay, so what we now had was the price of agrarian produce was no longer what local people could consume. Now we had a trading situation. Value changed from just being what was possible to produce on a site to what other people in the economic community were producing. If you could produce a lot of wheat, but if everyone else was producing a lot of wheat and the price of it was pressed down, obviously diminished because of oversupply, then the value of your land and your produce went down, irrespective of how hard you worked on it. So once we had the products of our land taking part in this broader commercial activity, particularly with respect to capitalism, where the idea was not to just produce to a level of subsistence, but produce to excess or surplus, then we had those markets coming and impacting value. So now land rent was no longer a first derivative of what the produce was, but now it was a second derivative of what the produce was as in relation to its trading markets. Next. Prices set by trading markets. Next. This is the financialization of land, and this persists through real estate today. This is the context in which we work with architecture, with property development, and with real estate in general. Next. Next. Next, yeah, good. Next, great. Next one, thank you. So for urban land, thanks Ludo, that's great. So for urban land now, we were talking about agrarian land, but when we're getting into cities, we're talking about residential. We're talking about the rent for use, generally residential, sometimes for workspace, and so on. So what is residential rent within capitalism? Next. Give me a couple here. Thanks, great. Okay, so once again, even though we're living in cities and we're not actually tilling the soil, what we're doing is using real estate, using buildings as part of our economic existence. That economic existence is, obviously we go to somewhere to work and we need that place to work. And our livelihood is produced by what we can labor and do within that space. What we need to do also is restore that labor. So in fact, our homes are part of our whole economic dynamic of restoring our earning capability as an economic man or woman. The rent we are able to pay is similar, is based on a similar dynamic to that of the agrarian producer, and that is whatever we can earn, we take away our other costs, and the net is what we can pay in rent. What we find is that usually in urban situations, that's 30 to 35% of an income ability. Now we see that rents are therefore dependent upon the potential income, the potential economic activity of a community and the broader economic conditions, the broader macroeconomic conditions. So what we see is that the land rent or value in an urban setting is the residential rent that can be paid less the amortization of the cost of building. Remember, when you're resting in a house, using a house for restoration of economic capacity, the house sits on, the building sits on the land, the building had to be bought, the building had to be built, and the land, therefore, is in fact the net of the costs of that building. The building is actually part of the labor on the land in order to produce the economic activity of mankind. So therefore, urban land prices are the third derivative of the macroeconomy or the capital markets. Next. Next, give me a couple, thanks, yeah. What's important is that we start to see, therefore, that land and property, the buildings on it, actually are involved in an activity of labor, okay? Buildings must produce, or in fact are related to the productive contribution of the people occupying them. The rent pays for the building's use. The wages pay for the human skill within that building. Okay, both of these go towards the economic product of, say, a workplace. Therefore, the provider of a building, the landlord, the owner of a building, has to create this component, create and deliver this component of this economic dynamic. So the provider of the building puts together the capital and the skill to create the building. In order to make the capital, or create the capital, or have the capital, the rent is applied. The rent is applied as a wage, essentially, or something for the labor, compensation for the labor of the building for the economic production. Therefore, the landlord's investment return is going to be, a little dollar sign here is slipped, is the net rent divided by the capital invested. Okay, so the landlord's capital is now going to be compensated by receiving rent. The way in which the proportionality in which that occurs is called a yield. And that, as you can see with a very simple one here of, say, $50,000 or pounds over $1 million gives 5%. This then makes this labor of real estate, building and land, an investment that is comparable with other investments. It's like investing in a factory. It's an investment in an economic and production activity. Okay, next. Next, give me a couple, thanks. Okay, so how does the landlord work through this sort of economic dynamic of providing this facility, this building on land that does its work? How does it work? How does it get the capital to actually produce this? Because if everyone could do it, everyone would go and build their own houses, go and build their own workplace all at once. But we know that people usually don't have enough money in their wage to pay for the whole capital cost. So there's a dependency here, an economic dependency upon the developer, upon the person who owns, who will create and own the building, to go and get that capital and build the building, and therefore replace or get paid for that capital or repay that capital. So how does the person get a return on that capital? Remember, this building is laboring, the owner is creating, or is part of this labor. The building deteriorates. So you can't just build a building and, despite our delight in houses that last forever and get renovated, the actual reality is that buildings will deteriorate or become obsolete. And that is a very significant part of the whole economic dynamic that a landlord or owner has to take into account. Because while the building deteriorates, land actually does not, technically. Some land becomes less popular or less interesting. Some land might be overused, but basically land does not theoretically lose its value. It goes on forever. The building on it, unfortunately, deteriorates. So now we have a very complex economic activity that is being undertaken in order to produce this space that we work in, live in, and so on. In order to have the capital for this, the landlord has to get a return of that capital. So give me a couple more. So it will come, thanks. It will come with some appreciation in the land. Basically, the building is deteriorating to the point of being worth nothing. Land going along, retaining its value, potentially appreciating, so some of it's providing some return of capital. Next. Yeah, okay. So what drives price appreciation? What will drive price appreciation in the land? If this is the only part of the economic construct where things are actually going to improve, what is this about? And this is where we start talking real estate markets. And an important thing is that I want you to understand that real estate markets are not all about this, all about building, all about that. It's really very fundamentally basic, and that is about the land. Next. Next, yep, there we go. Give me a few, thanks. Okay, so what we have, and we've got a picture there, I think. Ludo, thanks. Great. Okay, so what we have here is a discussion as to why price appreciation occurs. And, this is a fantastic myth that gets continually perpetuated, that there's a property ladder, that buildings last forever, that you should get on the property ladder and invest in real estate. Yes, there is some prosperity with owning real estate. Yes, there is, capital to be invested in it and returned. Yes, there is economic potential via consumption, but also be aware that real estate is, a constant milieu of rumor, promotion, fake news, and so on. There's a great book, which I recommend, called Narrative Economics by Robert Shiller, in which he talks about how stories, narratives, and particularly we're seeing today, how this is such a potent part of social existence and understanding of human existence today. The ability for rumor and misinformation to drive economic activity and worse is very prevalent, and that's important. And most horrendously, it's been applied to home ownership. Next. All right, so if it were just about our homes, that wouldn't be too bad a problem. However, it really impacts our cities. Give me a few here, please. Okay. Give me right down, thanks, perfect, excellent. All right, so what we have, if any of you have been to New York City lately, you will recognize at the southern end of Central Park, we have what's called Billionaires Row. This is a series of ultra high-rise buildings that have gone up over the past approximately 10 years. And, actually some of them are quite beautiful. The one over on, I guess, the far left is by Raphael Vernoli and is really quite a beautiful sculpture. But anyway, let's talk about the real estate. What happened here was that because the land was so incredibly valuable, these people were pushed to create as much square footage. Once again, create the surplus, push as far as you can. And what they did was build as much square footage as they could on these small pieces of land. Okay, so what happened with the market here, with the economic results, was that at first, Yes, this looked like, you know, nice way to live in a nice part of New York and have a nice view. And so people were paying approximately $25,000 a square meter. 2017, what was happening? The global recovery was occurring, money was flowing all around the world, moving out of Europe, Russia, China, and so on. New York City was a great place to put it. You can actually put it in a corporation here and no one will ever know it, who it belongs to. And so a lot of these were actually sought not by people who wanted to live in them, but by people who just wanted to use them as a piggy bank. And in fact, the price was bid up to approximately 48,000 per square meter. Okay, you know, no one was having a better life between 2015 and 2017 living in these places to justify that that financial uplift. So absolutely, it was absolutely demand for capital placement. Then, of course, these things don't last forever. We started to see overbuilding, and we've now started to see a fallback in prices. So now the price just at the end of last year was 36,000 per square meter. So this wild oscillation in pricing cannot be about the productive capability of real estate. Next. Okay, what it is about, as I said, just as the production of wheat from your tenant's farm became part of the part of the market economy for wheat through trade, through Europe and so on. So therefore, there was the derivative effect right back to the value of that land being a result of what wheat was trading for in Amsterdam at the time. Similarly, real estate, even in places, you know, like New York City and so on, is a result of these capital flows. They are not the result of wages, right, and economic use. They are not the result of changing living conditions particularly, nor have building costs changed dramatically. Next, give me a couple here. So therefore we see real estate as being, you know, I started out saying very basic, real estate is about using it. Now I've started to say real estate is about, you know, what the capital markets globally are interested in. Therefore, what we have is this understanding of real estate as a combination, yes, of use. Use is there. We wouldn't build them, we wouldn't need them if they weren't used for productive activities. However, so what you can see here is that we have a building, we put in tenants, the tenants are going to use it to do their productive work, they're going to pay rent to the owner is going to make a profit. The owner will put in a certain amount of capital to create the building as it's needed, but the owner is also focused on making this surplus profit. And that surplus profit is the hook into the capital markets. Next. Okay, so I always think it's great for, you know, architects and everyone to understand that real estate has this bifurcation of economic aspects. And and we call it the total return, the total investment return, often referred to as the internal rate of return. That's the mathematical formula used in its calculation. Importantly, it's comprised of two things. One is the yield and the other is the appreciation. The yield is the annual operating income from operating the building, right? That's different. That is the actual use of the building. We're going back once again to the fundamental notion of its productive ability. That is compared to the capital invested in the building. That is the labor of the building. It's going to be dependent upon the quality of the building to support the activity, the economic production of the activities, which is why you'll see landlords often throw out, you know, less profitable economic activities and put in economic activities of a higher cost or a higher productivity. And therefore the building quality plus location plus the macroeconomic activity in which the building is engaged are the factors that determine how the building operates, its economic potential. Okay, so a couple of things here. This is where architects are involved. This is where a good landlord is involved in determining how the quality of the building, how the manner in which the building functions is going to be best for the activities of the occupiers. And this can either be the workplace or it can be home, where people once again restore their working capacity. Next. So how does yield change? How does that labor of the building change? As I said, it is fundamentally dependent, despite all of the physical features, it's dependent upon the macroeconomy. And you can see here, the New York City yield is in the bright green. Oh, sorry, the yield of the New York City office market is in the bright green, and it trends around economic activity, which is the sort of bluish aqua line, and so on. Next. The other aspect, yield is the working part. Appreciation is the other component of what makes real estate valuable and what gives it investment return. Appreciation is not related to how the building operates directly, but rather appreciation is a determination of the sale price when you sell it, less what you paid for it in the beginning. Okay, so really essentially it's the profit or the price uplift, and everyone gets very excited about this. And the way in which it is measured, of course, is compared to what you actually invested in the building. When you think about it, this return, this component of the return is speculative, purely speculative, because what's it related to? The capital demand for the assets. Remember the New York City Billionaires Row, and the pricing there was purely based on capital demand for the assets. The forecast of future capital demand, talking about speculation, and the forecast of future use in the macroeconomic activity. Those are obviously purely speculative, and appreciation is fundamentally a speculative non-labor component of real estate. It is not about the labor it does, it's about what people anticipate about capital markets and how it relates to real estate. And that's a very important thing to remember. Next. A key thing about this speculative part or appreciation is that it is not related necessarily to economic activity. It is not related, nor is the pricing related to the yield. Just give me a couple more here. One more, Ludo. Thanks, that's great. No, back, sorry, one more. Thanks. No. No, sorry. No, forward. Doing great, thanks. Next. There we go. Thanks. Perfect. All right. So what we have here is a very interesting thing. The break in the blue line here was essentially when a major disruption, of course, in capital markets. So therefore, we had no activity occurring, and therefore no pricing. An important thing to understand here is that we have the red line, the dark red line is the pricing of the office space of the top quality Manhattan CBD office space. Okay, and as you can see, over the past 15 years, we've had a rise in pricing during the as we came out of the crash. Sorry, we've got the crash of the early part of 2009, and then we have a rising of price, then we have a fallback. Okay, so what we have here is the yield spread. An important part of this is that the yield, or the return on the labor of the building, as you can see, has its own dynamic. So that is not necessarily related to the pricing activity of the real estate at the time. You can see, in fact, there's something of a dysfunction. The only way in which you get a correlation of any significance is by an inversion of this, and that is the lighter orange line there. And that shows that there is essentially an inverse correlation between the labor of buildings and the actual pricing. Next. What does affect pricing? Just give me a little bit on the side, thank you. Is the capital flows, purely the capital flows. And this shows capital change into the US in terms of the aqua line. And what we see is the price growth of real estate in response to that. The income growth, that is what would impact the labor of a building, as you can see, is fairly moderate. Where you can see the spikes in pricing purely related to capital change. Next. The appreciation calculation, therefore, becomes this very fuzzy, misused. This is where the myth is created about home ownership. Home ownership and its potential for appreciation, is all about this sort of calculation of what will happen in the future. Give me a couple more, please, Leader. Thanks. And a couple more. That's right. Good. Thanks. So what we have here is just to give you a little bit of an insight into how real estate people and the financial markets or the capital markets actually measure this return on real estate is, and where its two dimensions can be specifically seen is, this is the Excel model, what we call a pro forma of the cash flow for real estate. Very simply, over 10 years, we have the rental revenues on the top line. We take away the operating expenses, the amount, we've got to turn on the lights, clean it, and so on, pay property taxes and so on. Net revenues, then there's some vacancy. The cash flow, the net operating income or cash flow every year is once again the result of the labor of the building, okay? And that, the measurement of that labor of the building is that annual cash flow, 570 over how much we paid for the building, which is 6 million. And that yield down here is 9.5%, okay? So that's the labor. When we look at a building, we always think of it in terms of, I'm going to buy it and sell it. So, and that's where the mythical part comes in. The mythical part occurs out here in the intended year of sale, that is year 10, when we're going to take what the NOI or the net operating income or the cash flow, in fact, of the following, what we anticipate it to be of the following year, which is an indication of its productive ability. But what we do is we perform a calculation called the capitalization of it, and we pick this number called a cap rate. Cap rate is probably, the biggest piece of fake news, even beyond anything Donald Trump says, okay? And so remember that when you hear cap rates, it's that's where they rank in terms of being totally misused and, lies, and more lies. So cap rate is applied, that gives a valuation. So just by that mere calculation, we now believe that our building is going to be worth 8.5 million in 10 years' time, where we only paid 6 million for it at the outset. That's all appreciation. And as you can see, it's speculative, revolving around this belief in what a cap rate will be, in what is going to be the necessary return that someone will want when they buy it at that point in year 10. We take all of that, in order to understand real estate holistically in its both dimensions, we take all of that cash flow over the various years, including what we sell it for, and it comes back to being, give me a couple more, please, Ludo. Thanks. It comes to be what we call the internal rate of return, the IRR. So that total rate of return here is 12.87. And you can see that that is more than just the annual yield. The difference between them, the way in which the total return of this real estate investment has changed from being just a calculation of its annual labor, is the appreciation, which is about 3.4%, which is the difference between the total return and the yield. Okay, that, of course, that extra piece, totally speculative. Next. That appreciation, as I want to remind you, is mostly passive. It depends on what the broader capital markets are doing, whether the money is interested in flowing into real estate, whether it's interested in flowing into New York City or not. It's also dependent upon macroeconomic, the macroeconomic context. Is New York City flourishing at the moment? Well, no, it's pretty much shut down. So therefore, that's going to impact real estate. Then it's going to be fake news, totally speculative, whatever myths are out there about real estate. Next. However, what we find is that the appreciation, the component of appreciation in investment returns in real estate tends to be the focus. Unfortunately, this focus leads to, sometimes we do get profits from it. You know, we can be lucky, and the macroeconomic environment may deliver us an appreciating property. However, what it mostly leads to is overspending on the acquisition because of the belief that it's going to go up, a loss of property because you put too much debt on it, and then the bank ends up taking it because it doesn't appreciate to that level. Inequality in that some people will own a piece of real estate that that transacts for much more than it's actually worth, and other people can't afford it. And finally, greed, avarice, divorce, suicide, and worse. And we have our dear Bruegel, okay, telling us how bad it can be. So this is the way in which real estate functions in its complex dimensions of financial aspects, its integration with the broader community, the broader macroeconomic community and the capital markets of the world. Okay, next. Important thing to take away is that from all of this understanding of real estate, we want to make real estate work again. And that, of course, has many, many dimensions. It means make it productive. It makes it make it socially useful. Understand it in terms of what it plays in an ongoing component of a macro economy or even a local economy, and put aside the speculation. Next. Thank you. Okay, so time for any questions? And my apologies once again for the little bit of technological disruption and so on, but delighted to be with you. Any questions, please?
Well, thank you, Patrice. I'm sure there are some questions. Thank you for giving us a very clear and wonderful sort of historical overview of all the things that that at least I personally have never fully understood about the real estate market, for lack of a better term. So I think this basically provides us with a very clear and lucid context for some of the other lectures that will be more, let's say, specific case studies. But I do believe there are some questions from our students. So please raise your hand here in the Zoom and take the lead. Michael, you are on mute.
Can you hear? I think you can hear me right now. Thank you for your nice and accessible overview of the history of real estate development. I guess as a designer, often I'm scared away by jargon and buzzwords, I guess.
Exactly.
It completely throws me off, and this is a nice way to, yeah, kind of understanding the inner workings of what it does. So to maybe continue on your last slide, make real estate work again. I was wondering how you propose to do this, and maybe as a follow-up, a few of us have read your text you wrote in Baumeister titled "Creation, Calculation, Speculation," and in this, you and your I believe you call it CURE, Center for Urban Real Estate. What is this CURE? Could you elaborate a bit more on this and how you propose that we designers can do this ourselves?
Very good. Yes, absolutely. I trained as an architect myself, obviously, and my big concern is that architects do not, understand, and they get bamboozled and caught up in it. So they create buildings with a fantastic iconic representation, and because that's what the developer wants, and the developer is using that for speculation. Okay, but we know, one thing that we find is that we want buildings, we should be creating buildings. As architects, as developers, we should be creating buildings that make the human existence better. Okay, so whether it's, doing the work, living, and so on. So the reason why you can't ignore the fact that the developer has this financial interest and aspect. The thing is to understand it, give it its place, but within that, work on what are the fundamental activities of, what's the fundamental purpose of our spatial creation? And the fundamental purpose of our spatial creation is to enrich human existence. Okay, so that's the first thing. So we're talking about space now. So every time we're thinking about space, we're thinking about how it's a better existence. Today, and then from that we extend to not just the individual person, but also how other people are affected by it, right? So what I'm trying to say is the building works within a community, not just for those who are inside it, but also those who are outside it. How does it work in terms of being accessible, being an inclusive part of their community or not? Okay, so working means just getting back down to the human level. How do buildings relate to human activities? Okay, so just do what we do, and that is design better for the occupants and for the community, and for everyone who's going to have an experiential interaction with the building.
I have another question. Well, thank you for the lecture. In regards to that understanding that the real estate has become the main client of the architect and is shaping our cities and all, I was wondering, what is your take or your opinion in the self-building process, like in the cases of Almere, for example, here in the Netherlands?
Yes, look, I think self-building is, a great activity, and essentially goes back to what, we are about. The problem is building becomes very expensive. One issue is the acquisition of land. An important thing about the self-building is often that you don't have to buy the land. There is an access fee to use of the land, and that's great. That takes away the huge, and as you remember from the lecture, it's the land that has the appreciation. So really it is taking away that whole game of real estate, and it's enabling you to create a building and use it as you, or create a building as you need to use it. And that's fine. The complexity comes when the costs become too much for anyone to be able to produce at any single time. So then you get an intermediary who provides the capital so that the building can be built faster than the money can be, put aside for it. And it's managing the greed of that intermediary. All right, that intermediary deserves a return on the capital they put into it, but what is the limit of that? And if you go back to the Greek philosophers, they said there was a limit. Greed was, people have a right to their property and people have a right to earn from it, but in the end, it's man's avarice that ruins the whole thing. Okay, so I love it. I love to see it. It provides a very working example of what, real estate or our use of real estate really is. But it's probably not scalable. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, I was sort of reflecting on your response to Michael's question. So I was wondering nowadays, since the real estate market is quite glamorized and the issue of functionality and environmental impacts are sort of disguised behind the attractive facades. So as an architect, I was just wondering, does sustainability or environmental grading of a property play a role in investments in real estate capitals nowadays?
Is the architect, sorry?
So as an architect, I was just wondering if sustainability and environmental grading of a building.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, yes. Well, this is, once again, its use. It's a productive part of our environment. And, that productive activity should not be a cost. It's not just a financial cost, it's a cost to the environment, right? So, the materials, where we take them from, what's that cost? And as I said to the first, to Michael's question, it's about the human existence, okay? And that's not just, what's paid out in money, but we know that it's what's paid out in destruction of the environment in terms of the choice of materials and things like that. So absolutely, environmental sustainability, a very important part. I didn't get time to get down to it, but absolutely. Good, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Anyone else?
Yes. Hi, Patrice. My name's Amy Thomas. I'm an architectural historian in the department.
Yes, Amy, we've met before, yes.
We have. Thank you so much for the lecture. I found it really informative and comprehensive and super useful, actually. I have a couple of questions. The first one is a kind of point of clarification, I suppose. Recently in my research, I've been looking at the history of developer-led architecture and how it's sort of historically been viewed very negatively, sort of associated with cheap building
yes.
But more recently, obviously, there are huge amounts of money spent on coming up with buildings that are designed for being highly functional, and lots of money spent on kind of user-focused research, looking at how these buildings are going to be used, because it's understood that sort of facilities management and the performance of a building over time is really important to its economic value as well. And so I guess my question is, these two, the way you talked about this bifurcation into appreciation and yield, and you put use in the yield category, but I was wondering if use and the sort of aesthetic formal qualities of a building influence the appreciation as well in some way.
Yeah, no, a very good point, Amy. Of course they do, because remember where appreciation is calculated on, the sort of third to last slide, in that over 10 years was based on what it would earn for someone who bought it at the end of 10 years. Right. So if the building is still performing well and is still very much appreciated by the tenants, then its rent will still be good and you will get, a good annual amount. And it's, unfortunately, there's a little twist put on that by a cap rate. Okay, and that can be, as I say, that's totally related to other things in capital markets. But fundamentally, the building is still going to have worth and value and be able to contribute its worth and value. The best thing just to do is to look through that sort of pricing, because that pricing is, there's a sort of a little extra layer of fake on it. Okay, yeah. But absolutely. And, make buildings work again means make them work properly, make them work for the long term, make them, today it means make them flexible, because obsolescence happens very quickly. Also, with the COVID thing, we've learned that, we have to now have distance. So flexibility and those sort of things, absolutely, I agree with you. And so on. And we must talk more about architects and developers because you know, Inigo Jones and Covent Garden, it's in my book. It was the first English architect was employed by a developer. So, you know,
Yeah,
and look, we've got St. Paul's. Yeah.
fascinating. Oh,
Yeah.
and the second question was more related to this historical overview you gave.
Mhm.
And I was just sort of curious, you know, now with globalization, I'm sure that real estate markets have a completely different character to what they had prior to globalization. But obviously globalization is not something that just happened overnight. It's actually been happening for centuries and sort of gradually changing. So I wondered if you know, going back to sort of when you talked about the Dutch and the trade and these kind of merchants, I wonder if you have been in any way connected real estate to kind of global trade and the spread of global ideas and global capital.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, and you know, definitely ideas, but you know, in fact, if you go back to the slides, the point at which real estate became an instrument of capital markets was when that trade occurred. When there was, you know, it wasn't just produce wheat to use and consume locally, but now put it into the global markets. Okay, so global markets, basically, once we started being traders at a, you know, any sort of distance, we were in a global market. And that's when this financial overlay or the impact of that global market came to affect real estate and added that, as I say, that overlay of an external force.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. All right. Well, Salomon, Ludo.
Thank you very much, Patrice.
Oh, what a great institution you have there, and wonderful ideas floating around. So I hope you have a very thrilling academic year coming up.
Thank you. The same to you.
I shall look forward to tuning in and following more of your lectures.
And we look forward to finally having you here in Delft in live at some point. I'm sure Amy also in her scholarship will want some way to reconnect to you in the future as she finishes her book also.
Yes, please.
And we look forward to reading your book when it comes out.
Just send me an email, Amy. Happy to help. Yeah.
Will do.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Patrice. Go enjoy your breakfast and a nice cappuccino, and we will go have some boter ham and other things, caramel milk here. So thank you again, and yeah, see the rest of you all next Friday. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.